Patrice is like, here's a buffet, you can have one night. You know, because I could have stayed the rest of the day there, so that was wonderful. So I'm gonna call the meeting to order and I guess do the roll call. All right. Joanne Adams.
Joanne Adams here.
Claire Batt.
Claire Batt here.
Patrice McCrary.
Patrice McCrary, I'm here.
Randy Poe.
Randy Poe, I'm here.
And Jamie Bowling.
Jamie Bowling, I'm here.
All right. We have one action item for today. It's the Portrait of a Learner graduate discussion. So we have a special presentation by Kelly Foster and David Cook. You should have your graphic in your folder. Also, you might want to have that sticker in.
I don't know.
Press the one that looks like somebody talking.
I'm not sure how special our presentation is going to be compared to all the presentations out there today. I don't believe we can match that. I think you guys are going to have a conversation, but one thing that we did want to share with you all from the last board meeting, after we had some conversation around United We Learn and profile of a graduate, if somebody can pull that graphic up, one of the things that we did in OCIS, and David and his team get credit for that work, is kind of put a graphic together that just put all the initiatives on one page and kind of shows you how that connects. I think you're pulling that up.
Yes.
Okay. Just to kind of help some clarity around the work that's currently going on with the department and how all that feeds in. And once we get that pulled up, I'll let David kind of talk about the individual pieces, but we thought this would be something that could help the curriculum committee in their discussion around next steps moving forward.
Kelly, is this?
Yes, yes. Here we go. So we titled it the Inclusive Learner Experience, and like I said, we just kind of wanted to put everything on a one-pager that can kind of show the work that's currently going on and how all that connects and how it helps push towards a prepared graduate. So I'll let David talk to you about the specific pieces of the document.
Right, so I think this goes back to something that Commissioner Glass has been talking about for several weeks now, about these three main areas of work that we're trying to do, and the first one is the student experience. And one of the things that happens every day with my team is we'll have people come to us and say, I can't do one more thing. And I'll say, but if you think about it in terms of the learner experience, and if you remember that, hopefully, if you're doing these things correctly, they're all tied together, then that's where I think the portrait of a graduate comes into play, because sometimes we think about adding something else, right? My teachers can't do something else, right? But if we think about it in this regard, that the purpose is to get a prepared graduate. And so when we think about the learning experiences that students have and the assessment experiences that students have, we shouldn't be looking at those as disjointed, that they should all lead to this prepared graduate. And one of the things I think has been important that we, from the last conversation that you all had, is in that regard, is thinking about the portrait of a graduate as a part of the prepared graduate. Sometimes here's what I hear, well, we're trying to do a portrait of a graduate, but we have so much to do with the academic content. Well, take a look at the profile of a graduate that you would see in those places. It's part of, the academic competencies are part of the whole thing. You don't need to look at these other competencies as separate. They're part of what it takes to be prepared. So not, I don't go over here on this one side and sort of look at those things like collaboration and critical thinking as separate from my math and my English and my social studies, but it's all part of it. We've got to be able to do those things when we do those academic competencies. So if you just look down the circles, the the closest thing to the student is the learning experiences, and should those not, in Commissioner Glass's report, he talked about PBL, for instance, as an example of that kind of thing where we're changing the way students are learning in the classroom. Assessment practices, well, if you're going to do PBL works or PBL classroom strategies, you probably need to think about assessing them using similar types of thinking, right? So if you teach a kid in a PBL environment, but you don't assess them in a PBL environment, you've got a disconnect. But we need to think about that as we move through all of these things related to the graduate. And then there's an accountability mindset piece, and I sometimes think that's missing too. And what we mean by that is our accountability system aligned to the first two circles? And is it the kind of accountability system we want? Is it designed to find out the right things about how we're doing with students and not just things that we've done for the last 50 years or whatever number you want to pull out of your hat? So are they really aligned to it? So again, the circles are concentric. So if they're the first one, then the second one, then the third one, and they all should be lined up to get back to that prepared graduate. And finally, the biggest circle, which is really what are those accountability practices? What are the things? We scroll up just a little bit. See the bottom of the, there we go. So those structures. So when we think about what we're holding kids accountable for, do those align with backing up the circles, the learning experiences, and the assessment practices? Are they all connected again? The word coherence comes to mind. So this was just our attempt to, because here, as I said earlier, what happens is we get calls from districts when we say there's a new deeper learning grant or there's a PBL Works project. Well, should I do that one or should I do this one? And I say, all right, ask yourself the question, what is my district trying to do? And if it's doing things this way, then it should become a part of your goals, not a separate added thing. We're going to try to do something else, but how does this enhance what we're already doing? I think that's how a district should ask the question. Not, well, I want to jump on this because there's some money and there's all of this kind of thing. No, does it match with what we're trying to do in our district? So that's how I feel like this blood work. That's how I feel like it leads us into this portrait conversation. So how does the user experience change? And what does the portrait do for that?
So what questions do you have for them before we kind of get into the decision of like how we want to proceed with this? So are there questions about any of this new graphic that they've created, which I think looks really great? But any questions about anything?
Comment.
Yeah.
I am glad to hear about the direction of melding the assessment to the learning experience, because for too long, we have been serving two masters, and it's very challenging for educators, and it's frustrating for our students to shift gears. So this is encouraging.
And I would say, just real quickly, because you're going to hear about this a little bit more detail this afternoon when Sarah and I present to you about the L3 work. But this work, that's kind of where the graphic sort of came from, is listening to the L3s tell us, this are the things we're working on. We're working on how to operationalize. So the districts that we have that are already doing portraits of graduates, how do we make that real for our students? How do we look at it, assess it, how do teachers, because it's a very different, obviously, way of thinking about assessment, because much of the time it's a teacher observing in a classroom with a project. Look, I'm showing you that I know this content in a different way. I'm not sitting down with a paper and pencil and taking a test. I'm showing you I built this thing. or I did this thing that is showing you that I have learned the elements of this particular content. So there is such a cohesiveness and a connectedness amongst those elements.
I do have a question. There are federal guidelines that must be adhered to as well. Where will those mesh?
I think that's a very good question, Bruce. I think it's that's one of the other things we're working on with our L3, working with some other things that we're doing is how do we engage in this work and make sure that we've not lost something because we're not following the rules, if you will. It is fortunate that I think we're at a place with the federal government where they seem to be more open to listening to this kind of thinking than they may have been in the past. I think it's all that the challenge is how do you balance, how do you keep the things you know are important. To me, it's not losing anything that you currently do. It's sort of adding to so that you balance it a little bit more, so that you're not just measuring content knowledge, but you're measuring these, you're thinking about these other things too.
And I'll just add to that, I think, the neat part about the work with the L3s is that we're hearing from districts what they would like assessment and accountability to look like. And that's a great question. And so I think we will take the knowledge that we learned from them, work with Ron and Sim's office and OAA, and, the end game is then to talk to the feds about, what options are out there for us. We have these new ideas and things that we would like to pursue in the assessment world. What can you get us waivers for? What would you agree to meet those federal regulations and requirements? So it's very exciting to think that things could look different moving forward.
So how many districts are already involved? Oh, sorry. How many districts are already involved in something similar to this?
I do too. Like I'm in a Zoom meeting again. We don't have the exact number of districts. We are working on that because sometimes we're not told the district's doing the work, and so we're probably going to do some surveying of districts to make sure we know how many districts are thinking about or have implemented a formal, and I say the word formal in that they've named it that. They named it something that's like portrait of a success or portrait of a graduate or a learner. I think there's a lot of districts who are doing some of this, having some of this conversation, and it ties in to the governor's conversation this morning. I think it's about all the mental health pieces, all the social emotional learning pieces. It's all of that together. In essence, what's the whole child? How are we going to know that they're prepared? Because they can be prepared with their ACT score and their GPA and all of that, and that gets them into college and so forth. But are they really prepared to do the things they need to do to be successful? Can they work on a team? Because every job they're going to go into requires them to work as a member of a team. Those kinds of things. So I would definitely say that we're well over half of the districts are at some point. They may be just starting the conversation, but there are a lot of districts who are thinking about how are they going to know when a kid walks across the stage that they don't just have the ability academically to achieve beyond high school, but that they can actually be successful in life.
And I think it's probably worth noting too, I think that's the charge of this committee is that the board wanted to have some sort of parameters or guidelines for districts that do want to engage in this, because many of them already have started the work and actually have, as David said, something formal on paper. And so it's not about us saying it has to be this way. We're just asking that, kind of here's some criteria. You're more than welcome to add additional things on there or put your own spin for your district, but here's just kind of the criteria and things to think about in developing your own profile.
And when we looked at it, as we talked about last meeting, to what Kelly just said, I think, we didn't come to you and say, because last time we presented you with our anchor competencies, as we called them before, we didn't just show up with those. Like we looked at one district and that's what they were doing. You could go national and pull 1,000 profile portraits of a graduate, and those 5 competencies that we showed you before are on every single one of them. There may be more, they may be named a little bit differently, but those seem to be the common foundational things that folks want kids to be able to do beyond their academic endeavors. So it's not, it's not like the wheel needs to be reinvented and we'll learn. And I don't think, as Kelly just pointed out, I don't think we would, if you looked at those 5, nobody's going to walk up and go, wait a minute, we don't do that one in our district. Well, yeah, they do. It's that they may be doing more. Some of those folks that are, I think about my home district, Shelby County, is way down the path. They're actually.
How long have they?
Shelby County's been working on theirs. They were actually, when we did this work inside our division, and that was started in 2017, they were one of our pilot districts. They were one of the districts that helped us design the rubrics, the outcomes, with a huge group of teachers. So we looked across the entire grade spans of public schools. So we created measurements at 2nd grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade about what does it look like for a second grade.
Right? Chair Hollingsworth, can I jump in for a question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, David, and you well know, I mean, in Boone, we started the graduate of a portrait with Ken Kay when he first started years ago. And I'm all for the portrait of the graduate, but I think you mentioned a very good thing that I wanted to point out there. I think a lot of people, unfortunately with the portrait of the graduate, they get hung up on whether it's 4 C's, 5 C's, 6 C's. The C's don't matter. I think what we have to do with our portrait of a graduate so that we're a little bit different than just, oh, well, we got a portrait of a graduate, everybody says they got one and whatever, is we have to tie this portrait of a graduate work into the deeper learning and the Ed Summit that we had, so that it's not just about creating another 4 C's type of situation that we all have. And I think that the other thing that Kelly said was very important, working with Rhonda Sims's division. I think that a few years ago, when a different commissioner was leading the particular work, we were developing a very good operational system for the students. But then, guess what? Accountability came into the way, and that derailed everything that we had from opportunity and access for kids. So I think as we're developing this system, and it was a great graph that you have, but that we have to say that this isn't something that we're just going to hang on the wall and put up here like everybody else has. I think we've got to be careful also as we're developing this, that with the deeper learning in the Kentucky Summit, that we're also telling districts, this is ultimately how you also should be looking at your directional systems within your school district, your HR functions, and all those things, to see whether you have the capacity to actually drive this outcome. Because far too much what we've done is we've created the end output, but we haven't looked whether the state actually even has the capacity to drive the outcomes that we want. So as we're going through that process, I think that we should be keeping in mind that this isn't just a cute symbol that we're going to create, that this should be driving our request to the legislature for funding and other things based on that opportunity and access, if we truly want to get at all children reaching this portrait of a graduate that we ultimately develop. So I hope that makes sense in that, because I think it's very important what Kelly said, that I think, we developed a system several years ago that was leading to this particular work. Of course, as you mentioned, the L3 and the other things, but we got derailed because of accountability and assessment. So I think we really have to have that intertwined situation so that we don't develop a product and then all of a sudden, well, Rhonda's department, and I'm not blaming Rhonda, she's just the name of the department there, where the assessment derailed that great opportunity and access that your people actually, helped create, through what we've learned in the past. So I just want to throw that out there.
David, you mentioned the work in Shelby County and in other counties across the state. And I think it's really important, as you said, to go with what they have done as well. My fellow Henry County, Wendell Berry, always says that global answers that don't work locally are no good. But if something works here, it's very likely that it will work other places. So I think looking at what those local districts have done is very important in this work. So thank you for doing that.
Dr. Glass?
Thank you. I was struck by the presentations the students had as we walked around during our break. And this weekend, this past weekend, my sister and my wife were having a conversation. My sister's a teacher in Warren County. My wife teaches in Fayette County. And they were talking about preparations that they had underway in some of their spaces to administer the upcoming state assessments. And it had to do with spacing students out, collaboration or cheating, as it sometimes is called in the testing environment. It was the removal of resources from walls where you might actually be able to look up and find the answer if you don't know it. And it was a discussion around the time necessary to administer the assessments. And just as we were walking through it, it was a contrast to me. The assessment environment that we currently create in a state's summative assessment format versus the kinds of work that you saw happening on display here. You saw projects and tasks that were real, authentic, and meaningful to students. You saw evidence of collaboration. You saw evidence of complex problems that required multiple attempts of trial and error, multi-step, the requirements of persistence, the requirement of creativity, all of which, or none of which, transfer very well into the current system. Believe that the kinds of skills that require the projects that we saw here today are a heck of a lot more useful in life than many of the skills that are required to do well in the current assessment framework we have. So I think it is this work and discussion around statewide portrait of a graduate is important because it's a signal from the state that we think that this work is important and that we value it. And we have to, as part of that, I think, transmit the notion that what we're establishing is a signal and that this is a floor from which we encourage and support districts to go even further. That we're not trying to specify this is exactly what it looks like or what it should look like, but we're trying to signal that this is really important and this is the kind of work that we encourage as a state. Because as Randy mentioned, Dr. Coe mentioned, there's some skepticism that our districts have as they engage in this work around, is this real? Because we've been Lucy to districts being Charlie Brown in the football on this before, where we've teed up all this work, got everybody excited, and then yanked it out at the last minute. And there is that skepticism that is present right now. And I don't have the answer for that because none of us here control all the decisions that are required to really bring about a performance-based or a project-based or a deeper learning-based assessment system. None of us do. So it's going to take a lot of work. So I can't say with certainty that all of this will come to fruition, but I can say with certainty what the outcome will be if we don't do anything. It will be nothing changes. So I think that it's, I approach it from a risk-reward calculation. That is the risk worth the reward? In this case, I think it is. I think it's the right one.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? So I think our task now is to decide if we want to move forward with this work and how we want to go about that. I know that, I mean, we are the curriculum committee, but I don't think we are equipped ourselves to be able to really do the work. You know, I think we add a nice element, but there are people that have been doing this work, that are in different groups, that have all of this knowledge, that as an elementary teacher that did not really have this going on, I mean, I've got a very steep learning curve, you know, to be able to contribute anything to this work. So I think what we need to do is think about possibly creating a subcommittee that, and just talking with Todd, that seems to be the most efficient way for us to be able to give people voting rights and those kinds of things, is to create a subcommittee of whoever that is on the board that would like to be a part of that work, can be a part of that work. But then looking at these different entities that have skin in the game, that can come together to make the decisions, to make this really have a good chance of success. I think if we don't have the right people around the table, then it doesn't really go anywhere. Now, I sent a communication with a proposed list of groups to pull from. Did anyone have any comments about that? I can kind of read that off. Randy, I can't tell if you don't have your hand up, do you?
No, I can hear you, and I reviewed the list. I don't have any problems with the list that you sent out. I think those were good suggestions, and then I would just take any suggestions from your panel there too. You know,
So
David and Kelly.
Does anybody have any other groups, or have you all seen this list? Okay, so I'll read it. So, and then since you may have some ideas, and we certainly want to get all the key people that can make this a reality in place. So the bulleted list we have, that would be part of our motion if this is what we decide. Any KBE member who wishes to participate, one Kentucky post-secondary faculty member designated by CBE President Aaron Thompson, with preference for prior participation in Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education. One representative from the Kentucky Student Voice Team, designated by Rachel Balin. Is that Balin? She's the SVT Managing Partner. One community leader from the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education, designated by the Commissioner. One family member from the Kentucky Coalition of Advancing Education, designated by the Commissioner. One district administrator or school leader from the Kentucky Coalition of Advancing Education, designated by the Commissioner. And one educator from the Kentucky Coalition of Advancing Education. So it's a nice, like, parents, teachers, like people that have been involved in the work, and then any of us that would like to participate. Because one problem with just doing it in our committee is there are people that are really interested that are on the other committee. So we didn't want to limit that.
And I would just add that staff from my office, you know, is able to assist you guys in that work.
Please, we need lots of assistance and counting on that.
And I would say, I love your list. I think the fact that you sort of connected that to the coalition is very important. To Joanne's point, I think if we can somehow sort of cross-reference this list against the districts that my team might say are the ones most having gone the farthest, if you will, or having the most skin in the game. And that, in some cases, that's going to work by just taking the coalition membership, because some of those people are already on the coalition. But I just want to make sure that we don't leave out the Shelby counties and the other districts.
We certainly need to lean on what they've learned.
Right.
So,
We also need to make certain that we have classroom teachers steeped in this, who are actually in the trenches and have it rolling.
Right.
And they
knows what
have,
it looks like.
they have
I
insight
can't
that
really visualize it.
they have the true insight.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Are we ready to entertain a motion to approve the creation of a subcommittee to support the development of a state-level portrait of a learner graduate and identify next step? The subcommittee will include that group that I just said.
The motion.
All right, we have a motion by Claire
I'll second that.
and Patrice seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. So thank you all for your great graphic and explanation. I'm really excited to see where this work takes us and to really, help us move into this United We Learn phase. Just do it. That's right. That's right. So we don't have any other action items on our agenda. Did anybody have anything they wanted to bring to the group? So I guess we need a motion to adjourn our committee.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Jamie, and a second. All right, Jillian, thank you. So I don't think you have time to go look at anything else because I think the agenda shows like we're over a couple of minutes already. But if you want to grab some water or whatever, all in favor of adjournment? Thank you.